Hare Krishna and welcome. Here we are with two of the most senior and celebrated Vaishnavas in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, two disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, His Holiness Hridayananda Das Goswami, who does not need an introduction, and Brahmatirtha Prabhu, also famous for the book Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, a transcription of his dialogue with Srila Prabhupada in the Mayapur Kutir, which is in the back of his photo, which is his background. So, welcome. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this dialogue. My name is Count Das. They are in Florida, USA. I'm right now in Sridham, Mayapur. As viewers might have heard, there is a bit of controversy going on within ISKCON about the role of women, and specifically if women should be allowed to accept disciples, should be allowed to become Diksha gurus. So there has been a lot of back and forth since more than 20 years. And right now, the snapshot of the situation is that one of the latest development is that one of the Indian leaders, Basu Ghosh Prabhu, another disciple of Srila Prabhupada, produced a video in which he responds or contests Vridananda Maharaj usage of certain expression. Maharaj said that some Indian leaders are behaving like mafia, in the sense they're threatening the GBC, they're putting pressure on the GBC to go along with their views on the subject. And so Maharaj would like to address the point. Is it really character assassination? Is it
I think it's an honest and rational response. Let me explain what I mean by the word mafia. Maybe we'll start there. And actually, you can even look at the dictionary. Okay, so in the dictionary, besides the Italian sense of the word, which we all know, mafia is any organized group using extortion and other criminal methods. So a closed group of people in a particular field having a controlling influence. So I would be delighted for Basu Ghosh Das to prove that I'm wrong. And there's one very easy way to do it. And that very easy way to do it is the only way to do it. And that is simply to declare on his honor, that he is loyal to Prabhupada's GBC, and if the GBC disagrees with him on the issue of Vaishnavi Diksha gurus, that he will accept it, and he has no intention whatsoever to create a schism in ISKCON. He will not or does not encourage any other devotees in ISKCON to create a schism. In other words, all he has to do is what everyone else does, and that is to declare publicly that they are loyal to Prabhupada, loyal to his system, and they may strongly disagree with GBC decisions, as many of us do, and we will, I don't want to say fight, but we will endeavor within ISKCON to change that and put maximum pressure on the GBC to come to the right decision, but maximum pressure does not include threatening to divide ISKCON, threatening to attack Prabhupada's body by doing so. Another way that Basu Ghosh Das could easily demonstrate that he's not acting like a mafioso would be to do what every other national or regional governing body has done in the entire world, and that is make it very clear legally, as far as possible, legally within the laws of India, that all of Prabhupada's properties in India are ultimately under the spiritual authority of the GBC. Now, every other country practically on earth has done that. As far as I know, India has not done that. The famous bureau. So if Basu Ghosh, if I invite him to correct me if I'm wrong and make those 2 points, that he is not in any way threatening to either leave ISKCON, encourage others to leave ISKCON, or to in any way create a schism in ISKCON, and that the India Bureau will do what the regional governing bodies in ISKCON do all over the world, and that is, as far as allowed by law, put all of ISKCON's properties in India under the spiritual authority of the GBC. Another thing he might do to demonstrate that he's not acting like a mafioso, which is any organized group using extortion and other criminal methods, and since Prabhupada's word is the law of ISKCON, to threaten not to follow the laws and GBC of ISKCON is a criminal method. And so these are simple English definitions. I'm sure you all have access to an English dictionary. Okay, here's what the word extortion means in English. And then reading for the dictionary. Extortion is the practice of obtaining something through force or threats. So all Basu Ghosh Dasa has to do is make it very clear to all of us that there is no threat, there is no use of force. Like all the rest of us, he's simply going to obey Prabhupada's system. Now, I've also heard that he said, and if he didn't say it, my apologies, my sincere apology, but that Prabhupada only wanted the GBC to manage rather than be in charge of things like spiritual principles. Of course, anyone who actually worked with Prabhupada on the GBC, as I did, knows very well this is nonsense. This is completely absurd. For example, and again, if Basu Ghosh didn't say this, then my sincere apologies. But so I'll make the general point. For many years, I worked, Prabhupada personally called me to his room in Mayapur and appointed me as a GBC. And there's absolutely no doubt that if there was any issue, spiritual, managerial, you name it, Prabhupada expected the GBC to take care of it. This is in his it's in database. For example, Prabhupada was asked by a reporter that when you were gone, Prabhupada, who will uh, safeguard the teaching of our philosophy. And Prabhupada said the GBC will do that. So, according, anyone who makes the frankly really unintelligent remark that the GBC should just manage, what if, for example, let's say some leader in ISKCON, it could be a temple president, it could be a sannyasi, a GBC, whatever, began preaching impersonalism. According to that claim, it would not be the responsibility of the GBC to stop that. So anyone who actually worked with Prabhupada knows this very, very well, that if anyone was preaching something improper, Prabhupada would go to the GBC and say, stop this, if anyone was preaching the wrong philosophy. So for anyone to make the, frankly, rather stupid point, and I'm not saying anyone did, but just to put it out there, that the GBC should just manage and they're not in charge of philosophy and spiritual standards, has basically very little understanding of how Prabhupada managed ISKCON, how Prabhupada instructed the GBC, and what he expected of us. So again, there's an old saying, if the shoe fits, wear it. If in fact there is no threat, if I've misunderstood, I will publicly apologize. And to verify that I did in fact misunderstand, and I'd be very happy to learn that I've misunderstood, and I'd be very happy to apologize publicly. Basu Ghosh Das simply has to say publicly, sincerely, that he, in fact, has no intention of in any way either himself leaving ISKCON, encouraging anyone else to leave ISKCON, or like the people in Bangalore trying to saying he's ISKCON, but we're not ISKCON. In other words, this way or that way, dividing ISKCON. That's what the word schism means, which is a word that he brought into this discussion. And the word schism means a split or division between strongly opposed sections or parties caused by differences in opinion or belief. It can also mean the formal separation of a church into two churches, or the secession of a group owing to doctrinal and other differences. That's what the word means. And in fact, it was Basu Ghosh, if I uh, remember correctly, who introduced the word schism into this discussion. So again, uh, Basu Ghosh Das, just make it very clear that you have no intention at all to leave ISKCON, to split ISKCON, to claim you're the real ISKCON and we're not the real ISKCON. Just make that very clear to us. And again, all of us who thought that you were implying that will publicly apologize. So, next point.
So thank you, Maharaj. Let me clarify one thing. Ramatirtha Prabhu is a trained professional mediator. He's here in a completely neutral role. He has taken some notes from the latest Basu Ghosh Prabhu's video, so he will remind us of some of the points raised so that we could address them. Of course, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, as an intelligent devotee, must have his own opinion, but in this particular program, this particular meeting is completely neutral and it's just helping us with references. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and I have to put on my neutral hat. I do want to quote from Basu Ghosh's most recent response to Rita Nanraj, in which he said, the GBC makes mistakes such as zonal acharya. They cannot be the final authority outside of management, and that's a quote from him that they should be restricted to management things.
Well, then the question would be, who restricts them? In other words, someone has to decide. So what Basu Ghosh is proposing basically is that the India Bureau be the highest authority. And that's absolutely not what Prabhupada intended. Now, in the case of the zonal acharya system, I have a few points to make, since that remark by Basu Ghosh is extremely weak. And I'll explain why it is. I'll explain exactly why I say that. First of all, Prabhupada, let's look at the zonal acharya system. Prabhupada managed ISKCON through zones. That wasn't my idea. It was, it wasn't someone else's idea. That's how Prabhupada organized ISKCON. When I became a guru in 1978 in Mayapur, at the age of 29, did I want to be a guru? No. Actually, I tried very hard to avoid that service, and my godbrothers, including the temple presidents, all the temple presidents in the area where I was to serve as a guru, became angry when I said that I don't want to do this, and they insisted that I do it. Now, Prabhupada managed ISKCON through zones. That's how he managed ISKCON. So when I became, by the order of the GBC and Prabhupada, when I became a guru in ISKCON, it's not that I became at that point a zonal leader. I was already a zonal leader. I just added another service. Now, to say that we should have done it a different way, there was a learning curve. The fact that when I was 29 years old and 8 years in the movement, and suddenly I had this responsibility, which at the time, actually, my health was very bad. I'd sort of exhausted my health in traveling around country to country, trying to keep Prabhupada's mission going in my area. And when Prabhupada left this world in his external form, I didn't want to be a guru. I wanted to go back to college because Prabhupada had ordered me to do so. So I think Basu Ghosh maybe even said some really brilliant things about academic studies. Prabhupada ordered me to go back to college. He ordered me to stay in school. And he said that I needed to do that to preach effectively to intelligent people. But in any case, so when Prabhupada left, he began to exercise that authority of guru in the same way that all authority in ISKCON was exercised at that point by Prabhupada's arrangement in geographic zones. That's the way ISKCON functioned. And did we do everything right? Of course not. Did Prabhupada leave one detailed instruction? For example, do you sit on a big seat? Do you sit on a low seat? Is there no seat? There was no instruction. Prabhupada actually kept telling us, don't concoct anything, just do what I'm doing. You can say, why didn't we consult with the Gaudiya Math? Because Prabhupada personally told us, I was in the room, that do not associate with them. Prabhupada personally told us that. I respected the Gaudiya Math gurus and I did not associate with them. Why? Because that's what Prabhupada ordered me to do. So the idea that I was supposed to just go and take shelter of people that Prabhupada told me not to associate with, no. Prabhupada said, do as I am doing. So in my own inexperienced way, in this involuntary service at the age of 29, I did the best I could, and Krishna protected me. Then, within a relatively short time, the so-called zonal acharya system was completely changed in 1985 in New Vrindavan. I know that because I was the person on the GBC that gave the final speech insisting that the GBC change the system. That was not, so that means that it took 7 years, starting from no knowledge, no experience, young men, and learning by experience. Then within 7 years, the whole system was changed. One other point I want to make is that there was never a time in the history of ISKCON when the uh, gurus in ISKCON thought they were above the GBC. Because if you know anything about legal history or jurisprudence, actually legal principles are tested in actual court decisions. Like someone, people may disagree on what a particular rule or law means. And when it actually comes before an authorized judge, that's, case history. That's how law becomes understood within a society. So in 1980, this was only 2 years after we just began to be gurus, and there's no internet, so no one knew what anyone else was doing. An issue came up where a few GBCs like Jayatirtha and Hansaduta were misbehaving. And an emergency GBC meeting was held in 1980 in my house in Los Angeles. And there, not one person of on the GBC said that the gurus are above the GBC. No, the GBC decided to strongly discipline the gurus, and the only person who actually said you can't do this was Jayatirtha, who had a very, very tragic ending. But other than that, other than Jayatirtha, no one on the GBC ever said that the gurus are above the GBC. So we became gurus. We worked within the zonal system that Prabhupada created. We just added another layer of authority. And we always knew the GBC was the final authority. And then when we saw that the system, there was difficulty and gurus were falling down, several years later, after that meeting in 1980, the system was completely changed. And I introduced, the resolution and or whatever, pushed it through the GBC, and everything changed. So one other point, which is extremely important, the system we had where gurus sat on big seats, never on the level of Prabhupada, but they sat on big seats, they accepted puja. That is not against any scriptural injunction. It's not against any direct order of Prabhupada. It was simply the best we could figure out, or the best I could figure. I didn't know what to do. My dear godbrother Radhanaswami has written that wonderful book, The Journey Home, and he traveled through India. I didn't. I had no idea. I didn't really care because the only guru that I really cared about was Prabhupada. And so we did not break any GBC law. We did not break any direct instruction from Prabhupada. We did not violate any principle of Shastra. It is a detail. And when we saw that that detail was not practical, we changed it. So to say that, and the GBC self-corrected. We didn't need Basu Das to come and try to change Prabhupada's system and say the GBC is not the spiritual authority of ISKCON. We didn't need a leader to come and threaten to split ISKCON. We didn't need that. We corrected the system when it became very clear that it wasn't working and it was causing too much trouble. And so we changed it. And every guru in ISKCON voted to change it. So what's the conclusion of the zonal acharya system? That the GBC, in fact, did correct the system without any threats of schisms. So, why not look at the real history of ISKCON?
In that regard, Basu Ghosh made 2 points. One, the GBC makes mistakes, and one example was that only Acharya, and the other example he says the GBC drove Pradyumna away. And he gave
I'll explain that. Yeah, do you want to finish it? Yeah, I'll explain. Yeah, I'll explain what happened with Pradyumna, who I respect very much. He was my first Sanskrit teacher. Prabhupada did not say, as Basu Ghosh Das seems to imply, that Prabhupada's that somehow Prabhupada established that if the GBC makes mistakes, then people like Basu Ghosh and the India Bureau can take over ISKCON and decide what is best for ISKCON, because the GBC has shown itself to not be infallible. That only if the GBC is infallible and never makes mistakes will they retain their authority. I don't think Prabhupada said that. Now, as far as Pradyumna Prabhu, I was in the room when Pradyumna came in, and he, if I remember correctly, basically, I think I do. Next, I'm very sure I remember correctly. He made the point that the new guru should not sit on these thrones. That was not the way it should be done. And I think he mentioned that some other groups in India, maybe it was the Gaudiya Math that Prabhupada told me not to associate with or listen to. So I asked Pradyumna one question, and that's kind of what settled the matter. And this was the terrible abuse that was inflicted on Pradyumna. I simply asked him, is that in Shastra? Because that's what Prabhupada taught us to ask. In other words, is it just a detail which Rupa Goswami and Prabhupada in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu say details are flexible, they're adjusted, it depends on time, place, and circumstances. So there is no injunction in any authorized Vaishnav literature that tells us how high a seat should be, or should a bona fide guru accept puja at all? If so, should it be in the temple, out of the temple, maybe halfway between, maybe in the doorway, like, Hiranyakashipu was not, or Lord Nrsimhadev was not inside or outside. How high should it be? Can you use velvet? Maybe that's too opulent. There's not one instruction, basic instruction. Prabhupada left absolutely no instructions. We had to just figure it out, and we were trying to figure out details. In my mind, I was thinking Prabhupada's the only bona fide guru that I've ever actually surrendered to or really trusted on everything. And this is how Prabhupada does it. So obviously I'm not on Prabhupada's level, which I said 1,000 times when I became a guru. And that's, documented. So obviously I'm not going to be on Prabhupada's level, but what Prabhupada showed us is that the way you're supposed to be a guru, because I don't know any other gurus to follow. And then when we found out, there were problems, then it was adjusted. So Pradyumna, I asked him that simple question. Is this in Shastra? Because Prabhupada taught me to ask that question. And he had no answer because, in fact, it's not in Shastra. And so therefore, Pradyumna, who, in many ways is a very nice devotee, he could not offer any evidence. He couldn't offer evidence that what we were doing was wrong. You might say it turned out to be impractical for some people, but not that it's against Shastra. It was not against any direct order of Prabhupada. It was not against Shastra. Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. There was no rule in Guru or Sadhu or Shastra. Guess what we were doing? And so when Pradyumna could not offer any evidence, then we concluded, well, he hasn't offered any evidence. And then he left the room. And that was the horrible, cruel, torturous mistreatment of Pradyumna Prabhu. So because of that, because we didn't take advice which did not come with any scriptural evidence, or therefore the GBC should not manage ISKCON? I mean, is that what Basu Ghosh is saying? Because we had a guru system when we had no experience, and as it became impractical for ISKCON, it was adjusted in a fairly short time. If you know anything about history, I don't know if Basu Ghosh studies history, except anyway, maybe he does. But for the system to be changed in 7 years is extremely fast in historical time. So to say that because we adopted a system and then it took us a few years to figure things out and adjust it, or because we didn't obey Pradyumna, who had no scriptural injunction, therefore Prabhupada's GBC system should be canceled and the India Bureau is the new leader of ISKCON. Or is it that the North American RGB, the India Bureau, South America, should every part of the world act independently? Should we break ISKCON into maybe dozens of pieces, like the Gaudiya Math, so that every regional body and maybe several regional bodies in one region, everyone should just make up their own rules? Does anyone really believe that after the tragedy of the Gaudiya Math, that Prabhupada wanted to do exactly what the Gaudiya Math did, and every senior devotee made up his own rules. Every senior devotee made his own, because if the India Bureau, the only regional body in the world, as far as I know, that did not obey the GBC order, and that's a management order. Even if Basu Ghosh says, well, the GBC should just manage, okay, an order saying that property should be under the spiritual control of the GBC, that is management. So even if one wants to make the absurd point, and only a person that never worked with Prabhupada at a GBC level could say something so ridiculous. Even if you say the GBC should just manage, that is management. That's property management. In fact, in Prabhupada's will, the first article in Prabhupada's last will is that the GBC is the ultimate managing authority, and the rest of the will is just assigning ISKCON property managers, because Prabhupada's greatest fear, one of his greatest fears, because over 90% of his will is dedicated to that, is that individual regional leaders like the India Bureau will actually take the properties. They will not be under GBC management. They will not, and instead, regional or local leaders will claim the properties under their control. That was Prabhupada's greatest fear. And that's why after the first sentence, the rest of the will is only to prevent what the India Bureau apparently thinks they are authorized to do, and that is to independently manage all these properties as they see fit.
I would like to add a few words. If this principle is accepted that making mistake completely delegitimizes a certain entity, in this case the GBC, which you very clearly explain how it is self-corrected. I mean, ISKCON India, perhaps this is not the time or place to get into too many details, but ISKCON India so many skeletons in its closet. I mean, there have been so many, we could say, mistakes, scandals, failures, uh,
Child abuse.
um, in many, many spheres, in many, many places. So they say that those who live in a glass house, they shouldn't throw stones, right? So there is really no moral or historical legitimacy to say that the ISKCON India Bureau somehow has the right to poise themselves higher than the GBC, or having a veto power on what the GBC decides. And again, now it's not the time to get into or name too many places. Like Patna and Mayapur and Hyderabad. I'll stop there. Ranatirtha Prabhu, take us to the next point, please.
Can't hear you.
Next point is, and I have it on my other screen, Basu goes 2 or 3 times referred to Gita 16:17 purport.
17 purport, okay?
16:7, I meant 16:7. I can read it. He says, the Manu Samhita is the guiding regulation for human behavior. Prabhupada says laws of inheritance, illegalities derived from this book. Now, in the Manu Samhita, it's clearly stated that women should be not given freedom. This does not mean that women are to be kept as slaves, but they are like children, and he goes on like that. And he quotes that verse, and then after that he goes to not verse, a purport, and then after that he quotes the Sunniti purport, which I know you're familiar with.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So I'll say a few things about that. Number one, the Manu Samhita, if the Manu Samhita is an authority, in the Manu Samhita, if a wife is unfaithful, or if you think your wife is unfaithful, you should throw her to wild dogs so that she's eaten alive, literally torn into little pieces by wild dogs. The Manu Samhita is very problematic. It's famous among scholars, even faithful Hindu scholars, as being a corrupt text. But if we take Prabhupada's point there, Niti, Prabhupada, I wrote an essay called Understanding Prabhupada, in which I give many, many quotes from Prabhupada, and I could, and I left out hundreds of other quotes in which Prabhupada says that if he says something which is not in Shastra, then it would be absurd to take it as infallible. So as far as the case of now, the distinction between Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru, it doesn't exist in the Bhagavatam. It doesn't exist in the Manusmriti. It doesn't exist in the Mahabharata or the other Puranas. It's a modern term. And I've explained this in other talks. So, of course, Prabhupada is the founder of Acharya. He said that, but then Prabhupada also said that women should be gurus many times. So Basu goes, so let's take, what do we do when we have Prabhupada saying it's this and then saying it's that? And these two things appear to be incompatible. And Prabhupada actually told me how to deal with things like that, which Basu Ghosh may not be aware of it. In 1971, when I was a householder temple president in Gainesville, I was the first temple president in Gainesville. And Prabhupada wrote me a letter, and he happened to mention this point. He said, there's mental speculation, but there's philosophical speculation. And this is the distinction he made. He gave the example of Krishna's statement in the Gita, Rasoham apsu konteya, I'm the taste of water. Now, Prabhupada says, if you speculate, is that true or not? Maybe it's not true. That's mental speculation. If you say, all right, Prabhupada said this, but how is it true? What does it mean? What if we have a paradox, which is an apparent contradiction? Because there's a quote which Basu Ghosh cites, and then there are many quotes from Prabhupada where he says the opposite. And so I'd like to read a quote from Prabhupada, which I think will explain the quote that that you just read. Because Basu Ghosh Prabhu Das, I think, also says that Prabhupada didn't want Western culture. He just wanted Indian culture. That's almost comically wrong because, just to give one example of innumerable, when Prabhupada had a long conversation with Allen Ginsberg, the famous poet, Prabhupada emphatically kept saying over and over and over again that he didn't want to bring Indian external culture. That was not his mission. Was Prabhupada lying to Allen Ginsberg? I've written essays in which I give page after page after page of quotes from Prabhupada saying he didn't want to bring external Indian culture, rather spiritual science, but somehow Basu Ghosh has canceled them. And so here I'll read a quote from Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, which explains why Prabhupada could say what you just read from the purport, and yet he says some other things very different, and that ultimately the quote I'm going to read shows that to save the planet, we have to do what this Prabhupada statement orders us to do. And I'll read it now. This is from the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, 4.854, fourth canto, chapter 854. And in that, the scene is that Narada Muni is instructing Dhruva Maharaj, who has fled his home, run away from home, and he meets Narada, and Narada instructs him. And he says that he instructs Dhruva to worship the Lord, Desha Kala Vibhagavit, understanding the differences of different places and times. And so in there, in that purport, I'll read you, and then I will, because probably he says, let's see, the method of worship, chanting the mantra and preparing the forms of the Lord is not stereotyped, nor is it exactly the same everywhere. It is specifically mentioned in this verse that one should take consideration of the time, place, and available conveniences. Our Krishna consciousness movement is going on throughout the entire world, and we also install deities in different centers. Sometimes our Indian friends, and even people, Indian friends who weren't necessarily born in India, sometimes our Indian friends, puffed up with concocted notions, criticize this has not been done, that has not been done. But they forget this instruction of Narada Muni to one of the greatest Vaishnavas, Dhruva Maharaj. One has to consider the particular time, country, and conveniences. What is convenient in India may not be convenient in the Western countries. Those who are not actually in the line of acharyas or who personally have no knowledge of how to act in the role of acharya unnecessarily criticize the activities of the ISKCON movement in countries outside of India. And there are many quotes like that. So therefore, I'm engaged in a process which Prabhupada instructed me to engage in, called philosophical speculation. I accept Prabhupada's statements as true, but how are they true? For example, Prabhupada often makes statements in a general, like, okay, this is this, that's that. He just states it generally, which technically, by grammar and logic, means it applies everywhere, but it doesn't. For example, Prabhupada says in a Gita purport that the hottest months of the year are May and June. But he doesn't say in northern India, which is where it's true. He just states it as a universal truth, but it's not. And if you read for example, in the west coast of the United States, the hottest months are August and September. In the southern hemisphere, the hottest months are basically June and July. But Prabhupada just says in an unqualified way, these are the hottest months. Prabhupada says, for example, in a purport, I think in the 7th canto, that a woman that doesn't marry declares herself to be independent and thus becomes a prostitute. In other words, grammatically, it's saying that every woman that doesn't marry is a prostitute. Now, we know that's not true. We know, for example, that Prabhupada accepted as one of his dearest and personal servants an unmarried woman, Jamuna, who had separated from Guru Das. And so, I mean, did Prabhupada really think that all of us? We have many statements from Prabhupada saying his unmarried disciple women are great saints, that they're very dear to Krishna. So are we to assume that every unmarried woman on earth, inside or outside of ISKCON, is a prostitute? And actually, we could compile hundreds of statements where Prabhupada states something grammatically as a universal truth, but in fact, it really only applies to certain specific cases. So we have Prabhupada's many statements that women should be gurus, and then some statements saying something else. So is this a contradiction? There's only two ways you can go here. I mean, of course, one way you can go, which is just illegitimate and it's just, it's cheating, is just to quote one statement and ignore the other statements. But if we want to be serious, if we take both statements as true, how do we reconcile them? And so the reconciliation Prabhupada gives that you have to make adjustments because it's a detail. I have a very simple question for Basu Ghosh Das. Is there anywhere in any Vaishnava scripture, did any acharya ever say that women not being gurus or diksha gurus is a basic principle of Bhakti Yoga? Rupa Goswami introduces this distinction in chapter 6 of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. There are details which change, and there are fundamental principles that cannot change, such as chant Hare Krishna, surrender to Krishna. So if Basu Ghosh claims, there's only two possibilities here. Number one, when Prabhupada says women aren't gurus, it's a detail, and therefore when he apparently contradicts it in many other places, it's not ultimately a contradiction because it depends on time and place. So that's what Basu Ghosh has to choose. And I invite him. I invite Basu Ghosh Das to choose. Which is it, Basu Ghosh Das? Is it that Prabhupada contradicts himself? That Prabhupada can't remember on Tuesday what he said on Friday? Is that what you're telling us? Or is it that what Prabhupada himself says, Prabhupada here gives a hermeneutical principle, which is that there are details, there are basic principles. Does any Shastra say that the exclusion of women from the post of guru is one of the basic principles of bhakti yoga, like chanting the holy names of Krishna, accepting a bona fide guru, worshiping Tulsi, associating with devotees in a spiritual place? Is the injunction against women? Did Prabhupada say that, you know, did he ever say, for example, that you shouldn't eat meat, but actually you should eat meat? Because in the statements where Prabhupada says that women should be gurus, he doesn't just say, okay, I'll allow it. He says, yes, everyone should be a guru. So therefore, Basu Ghosh Das, let's get a little, philosophy. Prabhupada said that religion without philosophy is fanaticism or sentimentalism. So I invite you to be philosophical. Which is it, Basu Ghosh Das? Are you claiming that Prabhupada simply contradicted himself? Did he contradict himself so that what's going on? Or do we apply this hermeneutic principle from his purport in 4.854 that it depends on time and place? And by the way, that same phrase, that a devotee has to understand differences of time and place, is found elsewhere in the Bhagavatam. That Bhishma on his bed of arrows is praised for being an expert in time and place. So I will leave it to Basu Ghosh Das to tell us whether he believes that Prabhupada simply contradicts himself and sort of one statement cancels out the other, or whether he was making time and place statements.
Okay, so I'll add something. You mentioned the Manu Samhita, and of course, we could dedicate many hours discussing the problems with the Manu Samhita. I had the chance to do well, a little compilation, the book entitled "What's Wrong with the Manu Samhita," which is downloadable for free. You can go to archive.org and download it. And based on Srila Prabhupada instructions, is very, very clear how our founder Acharya relativizes and to some extent delegitimizes the text. He says, for instance, that it's a karma kanda text, and of course, in other circumstances, he taught us that karma kanda, jnana kanda, kevala vishrabhanda, that the karma kanda texts are actually poison. Quoting Narottam Das Thakur, karma kanda texts are actually poison for Vaishnavas. And many other considerations. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that the original Manu Samhita was interpolated, was corrupted, and instead of promoting the text we have access to, instead of promoting Daiva Varnashram, promotes a caste system based on birth. Anyway, this is not a lecture on Manu Samhita. I wanted to say a few words on Suniti, which was mentioned by Basu Ghosh Prabhu in his video, and I would like to show the verse that he quotes.
In the meantime, when you're looking for that, can I make a point? Tamal Krishna Goswami actually told me about this. This is in Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 23, text 105, in which Lord Chaitanya tells Sanatana Goswami not to engage in shu, which means dry renunciation. This is what Prabhupada says about that. A candidate for Krishna consciousness in the Western countries should be taught about the renunciation of material existence, but one would teach candidates from a country like India in a different way. The teacher, Acharya, has to consider time, candidate, and country. He must avoid the principle of niyamagraha. That is, he should not try to perform the impossible. What is possible in one country may not be possible in another. The Acharya's duty is to accept the essence of devotional service. There may be a little change here and there as far as yukta vairagya, proper renunciation, is concerned. So, Prabhupada, as I've mentioned in other talks, the traditional enemies of the Vaishnavas were the smartas. In other words, people that put sort of obscure rules and regulations ahead of the essence of devotional service. So regarding Prabhupada's statement that you do things differently in the West, why is it that we are having a lot of success in the West and no one's falling down? Why is that? And not only in the West, but also in other places, in China, in Israel, in many other places, women are taking very senior spiritual leadership positions. They're not falling down. They're making many devotees. They are powerfully leading the movement. And so, again, I've said this many times. Basu Ghosh, why is it that you seem unwilling to scientifically test your theories? In other words, let's say, for example, a few women, or 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it is, were authorized by the GBC to initiate. There's only 2 possibilities. Number 1, they really do a bad job. Basu Ghosh is exonerated, and everyone sees, yeah, he was right. Or they do a great job, which in fact they're actually doing. And it turns out that no, there is no bad effect. It has a very positive effect. It attracts a lot of people to Prabhupada and Krishna, and there's no discernible problem. So that's what a spiritual science is. It's not dogma. It's not quoting from some obscure Smarta text. It's not basically claiming that Prabhupada contradicts himself. Philosophy, Basu Ghosh Prabhu. So therefore, why aren't you anxious? Or do you think that 2 or 3 women being gurus, when there's over 100 probably, male gurus, and that somehow if those 1 or 2 or 3 ladies had troubles, that would destroy ISKCON? I mean, that's absurd. That's actually it's absurd. So why aren't you anxious to prove your point? Why aren't you anxious to demonstrate that what you're giving us is a spiritual science? I'm willing to take that test. I'm willing to, take the risk. I'm willing to say, let's make some women gurus. And if they do very nicely, as they are doing, then I've scientifically proved that Krishna is with them. Are you willing to do that? I don't think so, but surprise me.
So, this is the verse, a famous verse, which Basu Ghosh Prabhu and others have been referring to for many, many, many years, because it's the only passage in Srila Prabhupada books which may give an impression, and I emphasize may give an impression of Srila Prabhupada being against women, Diksha Guru. So, Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Chapter 12, text 32, purport. This is the original transcription. This is what actually Srila Prabhupada dictated. Suniti, being in family relationship with Dhruva, his mother, and also woman, could not become the Diksha Guru of of Dhruva Maharaj. Now, besides the emphasis on the relationship, family relation, being a mother and so on, being a woman. Now, one thing that everybody should at least recognize is that the difference between singular and plural. Srila Prabhupada is talking about a particular lady living in Satya Yuga about 800 million years ago. So almost say 2 billion years ago. The situation was completely different. Again, it's a single instance of a particular lady who could not, being a woman in that circumstance, could not give initiation to Dhruva. So what I call it the Suniti hallucination, not because Suniti suffered of hallucination, but because some devotees apparently suffer of hallucination when they look at this purport. They look at this purport and they read this, which is not there, of course. Therefore, no woman can ever become Diksha Guru. And this has been the only an imaginary sentence as being the only pramana, the only evidence that they could extract from all Srila Prabhupada books. Hmm? Now, let's also remember that Srila Prabhupada also says in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Shudras and women are not admitted to a Vedic initiation. He also explained in this age, Kali Yuga, the Diksha Vidhana is performed according to Pancharatrik Vidi, not Vaidika Vidi. Vaidika Vidi is very strict. Unless one is a bona fide son, therefore a male child, of a Dvija, the initiation was not given. There is no indication anywhere that Suniti was initiated. So the old idea that Suniti giving diksha or not giving diksha is based on a false assumption. I would like to add another point directly from the purports in that chapter. Now, even according to the quite lenient and liberal standards of ISKCON, Suniti does not appear to be qualified as a diksha guru, uh, at least in that particular phase of her life. This is what the Bhagavatam tells us. This is the Bhagavatam verses. When Suniti heard about the rejection of Dhruva by his father, she, quote, became greatly aggrieved. This incident was unbearable to Suniti's patience. She began to burn as if in a forest fire, and in a grief she became just like a burnt leaf, and so lamented. And she remembered the words of her co-wife, her bright, lotus-like face filled with tears. She also was breathing very heavily. So this is how the Bhagavatam pictures Suniti. We can understand she was not, at least at that moment, in a shape to be Diksha Guru or anybody, Dhruva or anybody else.
Yes, it's thank you. And the point I made in Prabhupada's original text and in the context, a mother with her son is because mothers are generally very attached to their children. That's that's the nature of maternal love. And so to say that someone, a woman in that purport who is, as you pointed out, deeply attached to her son, we could even say, spiritually, whatever it was, but deeply attached to her son, grieving, anguished. You can't be a guru if you have those maternal. What Prabhupada doesn't say there is that she wasn't qualified to instruct someone that was not her son. And also, again, there are only two categories of injunctions that Rupa Goswami gives. They're either eternal, basic, unchangeable laws, or they're details. And he gives a list of the basic, unchangeable rules. And a woman not being a guru is not on the list. And so trying to impose this bodily concept on Krishna consciousness, that's what the Smartas do. The Vaishnavas have been fighting for thousands of years against the Smartas. And they're called Smartas because they quote obscure Smriti texts. And when did Prabhupada, for example, organize ISKCON according to the Manu Samhita? When did Prabhupada tell us these are now the rules for ISKCON and then quote the Manu Samhita? So I think we made all the points. Is there any other point that we have to make?
Ramatirtha Prabhu.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was really it.
Well, there was a
See.
lot of talk about the magical properties of the Brahmin thread.
Yeah, yeah. That was the other thing. He said he didn't give the thread to women. Um, women were never put in leadership roles when Bravo was here. He also said woman takes the caste of her husband, and so Prabhupada he quotes saying that Prabhupada said that women do not go to Varnashram college. Women don't go to Varnashram college.
But okay, Prabhupada in a conversation with Baulasva and what was his name? Dharma Dhyaksha. If any of you remember him. In LA, when a very favorable professor at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley was sort of talking to the devotees about the possibility of devotees teaching there. Wilson Judah was the name of this very favorable scholar. And Prabhupada said that if his disciples, and of course, I think Basu Ghosh said, we don't need mundane education. That's interesting because Prabhupada went to college. And Prabhupada said that if his disciples could teach Krishna consciousness in universities, that would save America and thereby save the world. And he was asked in that conversation, is this just for men or women? And Prabhupada said, he sort of reacted like it wasn't a very intelligent question. Of course, women also can get PhDs and teach in universities. So if you look at Prabhupada's statements, you can find statements like keep them barefoot and down on the farm or whatever. And you can find statements from Prabhupada saying, they should teach in universities. They should get PhDs. You find Prabhupada statements saying that, the women are equal to the men. The problem with Basu Ghosh's presentation is that he doesn't explain these other statements. He never explains them. He just quotes, half of what Prabhupada says, or less than half, actually, and then thinks he's won his point. He doesn't deal with the other statements of Prabhupada. So again, Basu Ghosh Das, you have to tell us which one you're choosing. Does Prabhupada simply contradict himself when he says one thing that women should be gurus? Did he forget what he said in a Bhagavatam purport? Is that what you're telling us? Or did Prabhupada trust us to have the intelligence to make time and place considerations? In fact, the Bhagavatam twice says that a devotee should understand time and place. And Prabhupada, in his purports to both those occurrences, says the same thing. You cannot do in the West what you do in India. And as far as what you can or should do in India, I think that's a whole other debate, which we should take on sometime. But in any case, Prabhupada says over and over again, it's foolish to try to do things in the West exactly as you do them in India. So there's lots of us who are preaching in the West by Prabhupada's mercy, by Krishna's mercy. We're making devotees. We're developing communities. No one's falling down. Women are taking senior responsibilities. The world is not ending. The sky is not falling. So all these horrible things that will happen don't happen. Only good things happen. So that's what it means to have a spiritual science.
Now let's just go to that one more point about the sacred thread, because
Yes, because when Prabhupada gave the sacred thread, we had to take off our shirts, bare chested, and he put the thread on us. I mean, obviously, that's not going to happen with ladies. Another point is the sacred thread. Prabhupada changed so many things, he didn't change everything. Prabhupada used to say, what is a sacred thread? It's 2 paisa. That's what it cost in those days in India. Prabhupada minimized it. And so was Prabhupada just trying to do some things to placate all the, envious people who were criticizing him in India? Or did Prabhupada believe that whether or not that a woman is only qualified if she has the 2 paisa thread around her? Why did Prabhupada say so many times that the women are as good as the men? They can also be gurus. Why did Prabhupada say that? Again, Prabhupada, whenever we went for second initiation, we had to go bare chested. He personally put the thread on us. Obviously, that's not appropriate for women. So did Prabhupada say that if I don't let you wear the thread, even if you're a first-class Brahmani, even if you're doing incredible service, as far as taking that, you're still not a twice-born person? And even that point about the woman takes the caste of her husband, not really. Because why is it that in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Arjun's main argument is that if the women aren't protected, there'll be mixed caste marriages? Prabhupada translates Varna Sankara as unwanted progeny. That is not the literal meaning. The literal meaning is caste mixing. If women don't belong to a caste, how can you mix the castes? In fact, in the Manu Samhita, there are specific technical terms. For example, a Brahmin wife with a Kshatriya husband, a Brahmin husband with a Kshatriya, and all the different combinations. A lot of the Brahma Samhita is giving the names for all the mixed marriages. Sankara means mixing of varnas. So if women don't have a varna, how can you have a mixed varna marriage? And not only that, what you find in the Bhagavatam is that in many cases, wives are more intelligent than their husbands. The wives of Kaliya, serpent, the wives of the Brahmins who wouldn't give food to Krishna. If you look at the Bhagavatam, the prayers that are offered when like Krishna enters Dwarka or leaves, leaves somewhere, leaves Indraprastha, what you find is that grammatically and theologically, often the most sophisticated prayers in the Bhagavatam are offered by women. Linguistically sophisticated, theologically sophisticated, often those prayers are offered by women. And why do we have so many cases where women are more intelligent than their husbands? So, anyway, there's a lot to say, but I think we've kind of said it.
Yeah, I would like to show an example of what you mentioned of how Srila Prabhupada talks in terms of Stridharma, if you want to use the expression. He had a very, very vast range of ideas about the engagement of women. And this is just an example. In one letter to Kirtanananda in 69, is saying, I'm always thinking of your new Vrindavan. The first thing is that whether the girls and women who live there are agreeable, he say tentatively, he's not imposing it, but are agreeable to work as I have suggested, namely, one, to take care of the children, two, to keep the whole temple kitchen clean, etc., three, cooking, four, churning butter. And this was New Vrindavan. Uh, but then he also writes, this is just next year, less than 1 year later, he writes, these Siddhantic conclusions are being mentioned in all my books, and the boys and girls in our Krishna society should now give more attention for studying the books very attentively. I hope in Washington Center you will have all the boys and girls to follow this method, because henceforward we will have to face many scholars and philosophers to stabilize our Krishna consciousness movement. Letter to Krishna Devi, February 1970. This is just one example of how broad was Srila Prabhupada's vision. There is no need of create a false dilemma. Did Srila Prabhupada want all the women in the farm churning butter, or wanted in the capital of the United States arguing, debating with scholars? He wanted both, obviously, as the historical record shows. As far as the women not having varnas, I find it quite ridiculous, because uh, as you mentioned, the Shastra, the Bhagavatam talks about Anuloma and Pratiloma marriages, which wouldn't make any sense if women did not have their own Varna. Even in astrology, in Jyotish, one of these basic element that one considers about the person, especially for compatibility, is the Varna of men and the Varna of women. So that really doesn't make any sense. And it's a great insult, because animals don't have varna, cows don't have varnas. If we say that women don't have varnas, it's like basically treating women like animals. Now, one note about the Brahmin thread. 13 years ago, I compiled this book. This Srila Prabhupada want women Diksha gurus, and if I can share a little autobiographical thing, how this book was born. There's a senior devotee who wishes to remain anonymous asked me, because at the time the same debate was going on. He said, why don't you see the arguments and try to address them? So I thought, okay, this will be a small paper, few arguments, few responses, but actually it built into about almost 300 pages a book. And I was surprised that several of the arguments against women Diksha Guru revolved around the Brahmin thread. And I was personally surprised. And so in the book, we gave historical evidence, like in ancient time, the women were using actually the Brahmin threads. There is artistic, iconographic evidence in statues of goddesses, but that it's not constitutionally incompatible, a Brahmin thread and the female body. But then, it became impractical to use it. And of course, for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, we use the Brahmin thread to emphasize how the Vaishnavas were socially respectable, would have been counterproductive to give also a Brahmin thread to women, would make the whole Gaudiya Math look really strange. But the point I like to make is that the essence of the Diksha is the mantra, it's not the thread. If you have the mantras, you are initiated, you can worship the deities and everything else. It's not the Brahmin thread. Two more things. They say, some people say, how can a woman give a Brahmin thread if she doesn't wear it? I mean, don't try to look at the logic of it. But just to address the point, uh, women give the Brahmin thread all the time, for instance, to the deities. In our Pancharatra Pradipa book, which is like a manual for deity worship, is very clear that part of the procedure of deity worship is to give the Brahmin thread to the deity. In the Bhagavatam, when Kashyapa instructs Aditi on a particular procedure, the Bhagavatam itself mentions how she should put the Brahmin thread on the deity. So to say that because they don't wear, they cannot hand a Brahmin thread to the disciples is absurd. It makes me think of the first time Srila Prabhupada came back to the West after he went to India in 67. He brought some saris for the ladies as gifts. It's like if you can, it's like saying, well, Srila Prabhupada doesn't wear sari, so he cannot give a sari to his disciples. It's the same level of absurdity.
I think we've addressed all the points that Basu Ghosh had made.
Now, I would
Yeah.
like to ask both of you, how would you see a resolution to this impasse? We have a global impasse.
There's only one possible resolution, and that is a resolution according to Prabhupada's system. So many of us are convinced that the GBC, I think with good intentions, they're trying to keep ISKCON together. Once the India Bureau makes very clear that they are not threatening directly or indirectly a schism, that they will obey the GBC resolution, whether they like it or not. In other words, they will be as loyal to Prabhupada as we have proven ourselves to be. Because many of us were strongly in favor of Vaishnavi Diksha Gurus 20 years ago. For 20 years, we have been tolerating what many of us consider to be the GBC's imperfect management of ISKCON. So, are they as loyal to Prabhupada as we are? Or do you just quote Prabhupada when it serves your purpose of repressing women? So, let them declare that. Let them declare that they accept the GBC as the ultimate managing authority. Managing properties, being legally responsible for ISKCON properties, is certainly management. So let the India Bureau correct the disgrace of being the only regional body, I think, in the world, as far as I know. Maybe, I don't know, some country no one's ever heard of, but in terms of any major country, we all put our properties under the GBC. Why? Because Prabhupada wanted the GBC to be the ultimate managing authority. So that's the only possible resolution, because to be perfectly honest, I don't think we'll ever know what the GBC members really think unless the India Bureau, does not blackmail them, does not act like a mafia. I repeat the word, in the sense that extortion. So if I'm using that word incorrectly, I will publicly apologize. But let Basu Ghosh make very, very clear that he is loyal to the GBC, loyal to ISKCON. He is urging all the Indian leaders, temple presidents, regional secretaries, to obey the GBC decision. Prabhupada even said, if you don't agree with the GBC decision, you follow it and then you work to correct it. So that's how we'll find out what the GBC really thinks, by the India Bureau showing the same loyalty to Prabhupada's system that every other regional board does. And then we'll make our arguments.
Ramatita Prabhu, would you like to add anything, especially as a professional mediator?
Um, This has been discussed ad nauseum. It's been mediated. It seems that the GBC resolution authorizing women even had a provision that local customs could be honored. So, for example, India may have a different local custom than America because it's a detail, not a principle.
Yeah,
So,
but what if, can I ask you something?
yeah,
What if it turns out, as it does turn out,
yeah.
that there are many, many, many women gurus in India?
Well, there are. I mean, that's a known fact. At least let the West, where the Western mission is suffering a lot, let's use every tool we have to make the Western mission successful. Actually, we pray to Prabhupada, you came to save the Western world. We pray that at least 3 times a day. So it seemed to me, let's try it in America. Let India do its own thing for now. And then in a few years from now, we'll see what happens. I suspect what will happen is the women gurus will be quite successful. But let's see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, in connection with the suffering of the West, um, it's uh, it's actually quite intense. Radhikaraman Prabhu, professor, scholar, once he presented at the GBC College, and he was explaining how the modern mind, when they look at the religious group, they look at two things: how they treat nature and how they treat women.
Exactly.
So when people get to know how ISKCON is still debating this thing, um, which is absurd because what is a guru anyway? It's a transmitter of spiritual knowledge. What the body has to do, what part of the male body is essential in the process of diksha? This is a question nobody could answer so far. Um, so people are distancing themselves from ISKCON. They don't want to have anything to do, and some devotees are very frustrated by this state of affair. This letter, very long, detailed, and well written, I must say, letter from Latin America describes, I believe, 15 points in which this situation is the stalemate is creating trouble. And one thing that they say is that even Hindu organizations are distancing themselves from ISKCON because of the present situation. So the pain, the suffering, and ultimately the damage to the missionary efforts are real.
Yes, we should really uh, expose this nonsense idea that in India, people in general, educated people in India, don't want women gurus. That's completely absurd. It's actually another absurdity is the idea that I've heard that Basu Ghosh and others, again, if I'm mistaken, I apologize, are sort of playing this card, this nationalism card, that we're not going to be, the West is not going to tell us what to do. The ironic thing is that all the main ringleaders in this mafia uh, are Westerners telling Indian temple presidents what to do. The ironic thing is that the North American leaders, whether it's the RGB or the GBCs, no one in America is telling the Indian leaders how to run their temples. It's the American and Western leaders in India. They're not Indians. They're the ones who are bullying the Indian temple presidents, threatening them. That's the point. If anyone is trying to culturally colonize India, it's the people like Basu Ghosh. Because, as you said, in India, there are so many educated people, open-minded people. So the idea that India, India itself, is demanding that there not be women gurus is absolutely ludicrous. It's absurd. And so it's just a group of extremely radical Western people in India manipulating the India Bureau for their own purpose. The same people who had something called General Headquarters many, many years ago, who were openly, not open, they were clandestinely planning to get control in ISKCON for their own extreme right, radical right wing purposes. And now they have some power in the India Bureau. I think someone just has to speak the truth here. I mean, we can dance around it, but that's what's going on. India is not any less open to women gurus than America or any other Western country. So let's just say it right. If right now, because certain people have a lot of influence in the India Bureau, and therefore we don't want to have a war with them now, so let them continue to manipulate things as they like for now, but leave us alone in the West. Let's not say something absurd like, well, we have to be culturally sensitive in India, and in India, you can't really have a woman guru. That is just nonsense. India has hundreds of women gurus with millions and millions of followers. So, no, it's not cultural sensitivity. It's not Western people trying to dictate to India. It's the opposite, just saying that don't dictate to us. If the Western leaders say to the Indian leaders, don't dictate to us in the West, somehow that means we're trying to dictate to India. It's actually the small group of Western devotees in India who are sort of, trying to dictate to the Indian temple presidents, who want to dictate to ISKCON in North America, who want to dictate to the entire world their radical, extreme views. They want to tell everybody what to do. And so what we're really fighting for here is to stop people who would usurp power, which Prabhupada never gave them, and basically, if left to their own devices, ruin ISKCON for the same reason the Gaudiya Math was ruined, because they didn't follow the GBC. So if the GBC, a majority of the GBC says, okay, there's no pressure, there's no risk from the India Bureau, there are no threats, they will be loyal to ISKCON no matter what we decide. But despite this overwhelming evidence, the majority of the GBC feel that Prabhupada would never allow women to be gurus. I want to hear that from them. Let them say that on my honor as a Brahmana, as a follower of Prabhupada, I'm voting my conscience, even knowing that it's going to basically make it impossible to spread the movement very widely in the Western world, which means that basically it becomes extremely unlikely that Prabhupada's global strategy will be successful. Prabhupada's global strategy was to save the world by making Krishna consciousness powerful in the Western world. We all know that if you have this sexist policy toward gurus, that there's no way in the world ISKCON will become prominent in the West. And so they're willing, because of their fetish, because of their, I don't know what, I don't want to psychoanalyze these people, however tempting it is, but because they've made the whole goal of their life to repress women. Again, despite it's tempting, but I won't go there in terms of psychological analysis. They've made the whole goal of their life repressing women, and they're willing to sacrifice the whole planet. It's like, Bhishma, let the whole planet go to hell. I won't change my opinion. And then Krishna ultimately instructed Bhishma, that's not the way it is. You don't do things like that. So that's what it is. Are we willing to let the whole planet go to hell? The Hare Krishna movement will never actually become powerful in the West, which means the rest of the world will never ultimately accept it, because that was Prabhupada's strategy. And for what? To keep women down. I don't think you need to have a PhD in psychology to understand there's something really strange here going on. And these are the same people who've been plotting for many years to stop women from advancing, stop women from having higher education, even though Prabhupada said they should get PhDs and teach in universities. These are not people following Prabhupada strictly. These are not people that even take on the responsibility to explain why Prabhupada said women should be gurus. And how do we reconcile these things? We have a paradox. I personally will go on record right here, right now, that I don't think Prabhupada contradicted himself. I don't think Prabhupada forgot on Thursday what he said on Tuesday. I think that actually Prabhupada was a very sophisticated, complex philosopher. And he said, this is not my first language. He made statements which grammatically seem to be absolute injunctions, but which in fact are not. They're not, first of all, because they're not listed by Rupa Goswami as basic principles. And they're not absolute because Prabhupada said the opposite in other times. And so this is called philosophy. And if you can't do this, if you can't see this, then maybe you're just not really a candidate to be a spiritual scientist. But maybe it's more important to have a male body than it is to be a spiritual scientist. Maybe it's an essential qualification to be Krishna conscious and teach it to others, that you have the right kind of material body. I don't think that's what Prabhupada taught us. And, forgive me for any offense, but someone's got to just come out and speak the truth. I mean, not that I mean, many people are speaking the truth. I'm not obviously not the only one. There are many, many devotees. I mean, you're brilliant at these things, Gontea. But I'm going to say what I think is really true. You know, it says in the Bhagavatam that in Kali Yuga, the last leg of Dharma is truth. And that's what I really think is happening. Based on the past record of the, general headquarters, GHQ, that where you find people openly plotting to take control of ISKCON. And a lot of the people who were in that plot are also the ones who are most vocally opposing the women gurus.
Yeah,
Therefore,
but sorry, the four devotees,
go ahead.
the four devotees who in February went in front of the GBC uh, to oppose women Diksha gurus, all four were part of this GHQ.
Conspiracy.
There is a cultural continuation, unbroken continuation.
All right. Anyway, so thank you very much, Conte. Thank you,
So,
Brahmatirtha.
Maharaj, thank you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu.
Let's shut off the recording.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.